There's something about Kentucky that makes violence poetic. Maybe it's the bluegrass and bourbon, beauty covering the bones. Maybe it's the way sin travels faster than a train ticket. In the winter of 1901, Lexington was the crossroads of both refinement and ruin. Behind lace curtains, horse breeders toasted prosperity, while down on Water Street, drifters and showgirls bartered dreams for whiskey. It was the dawn of modern murder. Electric lights were new. So was the idea that killing could be mechanical. And one December night, two women vanished into that new world, their beauty, their bodies, and their trust packed neatly into wooden trunks. This is Two Trunks, One Ticket, The Butcher of Lexington. I'm Becca, and this is Deadly Truths, where history, horror, and humanity collide. Every episode, we go beyond the headlines and into the hidden corners of American violence, the soldiers, the murderers, the martyrs, and the ghosts that history tried to forget. Some of these stories are old, some are still unfolding, but they all ask the same question: what drives ordinary people to cross the line between duty and destruction? This is Deadly Truths. Lexington, Kentucky, December 1901. The city sat between two centuries. Old world charm wearing a new electric grin. Gas lamps flickered next to Edison bulbs. Horse carts rolled past automobiles. Society ladies in feathered hats shared sidewalks with bootblacks and fortune tellers. It was a town that sold respectability by day and sin by night. On Main Street, the hotels catered to horse breeders and politicians, but one block over, on Water and Short Streets, the variety girls lived. Performers, dancers, seamstresses, and the occasional con woman passing through between train stops. That's where Lillian Rodin and Minnie Everly found their room, a small space above a milliner's shop with one gas jet and a wash basin. Both were 20-something, city-bred, self-taught, and trying to make a living off charm and needlework. Lillian, the more cautious of the two, quiet, brown-haired with eyes that missed nothing. Minnie, bold and restless. She laughed loud, smoked cigarettes, and liked men who promised things. They told the landlady they were visiting from Chicago, working the winter circuit, maybe Louisville next, maybe St. Louis if money stretched that far. But Lillian confided to another tenant that they'd come to Lexington to meet a man, Claude O'Brien. He was everything a traveling woman wanted to believe in: well-dressed, well-spoken, with that polished Irish charm and a salesman's handshake. O'Brien claimed to represent a railway supply company, said he could get them work tailoring uniforms, maybe even help them join a touring show headed east. He had a plan. He always had a plan. The girls spent that first week sewing, shopping, and waiting. They were last seen walking arm in arm down Main Street, laughing, headed toward the train depot. 3 days later, they were gone. On December 12th, station clerks in Cincinnati noticed two large freight trunks leaking a strange fluid. One sniffed, stepped back, and said, "That ain't lamp oil." When police pried them open, the air turned sour with decay. Inside, what was left of Lillian and Minnie, wrapped in oilcloth, limbs severed, one head missing, each packed like freight and labeled, "From C. O'Brien, Lexington, Kentucky." The Cincinnati Enquirer called it the new American horror. They were right. It was a new kind of killing, calculated, cold, and transactional. Not crime of passion, not robbery, just control. By dawn on December 13th, 1901, the story had already outrun the killer. Two women in trunks, horrible Lexington mystery. That headline bled across front pages from Chicago to New Orleans. Lexington woke to find itself the stage for a national scandal. Police swarmed the freight office, questioned every porter, every drayman who'd handled the trunks. The sender's name was printed clear as day: C. O'Brien. Address: a boarding room on Short Street. When officers kicked the door open, the smell hit them first: metallic, sour, and unmistakable. Blood soaked through the mattress. Sawdust covered the floor. On a small table sat a butcher's knife, wiped but not cleaned. And beneath a stack of receipts, a shipping ticket marked Cincinnati. prepaid freight. The room looked less like a murder scene and more like a workspace. Neat, deliberate, functional. A neighbor told police she'd heard the whine of a saw around midnight, followed by the sound of burning cloth. Another said O'Brien had joked earlier that week about packing up the girls for a trip. Nobody laughed now. The telegraphs crackled again that night, this time with orders to every station north of Louisville. Hold all Irishmen traveling alone, may be armed, suspect in trunk murders. But Claude O'Brien was already moving. He'd cut his hair, shaved his mustache, and boarded the Louisville and Nashville line under the name Charles O'Neill. He carried a revolver, a change of clothes, and the jewelry taken from both women. Rings, lockets, and a small cameo brooch still flecked with blood in the clasp. 2 days later, near Covington, Kentucky, a deputy spotted him buying a train ticket with shaky hands. The man's boots were still stained red around the soles. O'Brien didn't run. He didn't deny. He simply said, "I guess this is about them trunks." Back in Lexington, the courthouse filled with gawkers. Reporters fought for sketches of the accused. Dark hair, blue eyes, handsome in a tired way. Some papers painted him as a monster, others as a fallen gentleman driven mad by liquor. But the evidence told a cleaner story. Freight receipts in his handwriting, a knife matching the cut patterns on the bodies, witnesses who saw the women enter his room and never leave. It was open and shut, yet something about the calm in his face, the faint smirk in the mugshot, unsettled even the hardened detectives. O'Brien didn't look like a madman. He looked like a salesman closing a deal. On February 3rd, 1902, his trial began in the Fayette County Courthouse. The defense claimed drunken blackout. The prosecution called it what it was: premeditated butchery. Spectators filled the benches, women clutching handkerchiefs, men whispering that this O'Brien fella was too smooth to hang. The jury took less than 2 hours. Guilty, double murder, death by hanging. Reporters begged for a final statement. He told them they wouldn't have been missed long. Women like that never are. On April 11th, 1902, at dawn, behind the Fayette jail, Claude O'Brien stepped to the gallows before 200 witnesses. His pulse was taken before and after the drop. The newspapers printed both numbers. It wasn't just a killing, it was public entertainment. That's the part history forgets. Not just what he did, but how many people came to watch him die. In the end, the state proved it could punish evil. It just never stopped enjoying the spectacle. After the hanging, Lexington tried to sweep it all away. The boarding house on Short Street was scrubbed, repainted, and rented to a grocer's widow. But the blood didn't fade, not from memory and not from the headlines. Reporters called Claude O'Brien the Butcher of Lexington, and they meant it literally. His name became shorthand for male brutality wrapped in politeness. The polite predator, the gentleman killer. Yet beneath all the moral panic and newspaper theater, something new was brewing: forensics. Until 1901, Kentucky had no state morgue. Autopsies were rare, usually performed in back rooms or not at all. This case, grotesque, public, undeniable, forced change. Lawmakers began funding proper medical examinations. Evidence was cataloged instead of burned. The concept of trace evidence entered local vocabulary. Claude O'Brien's sawdust floor became a blueprint for modern criminal investigation in the South. Blood analysis, fiber collection, and matching tool marks, all of it began here with 2 women in trunks. And yet, none of it was for them. The sermons came next. Pastors thundered from pulpits that modern sin breeds modern horror. They blamed the victims, calling them loose women, city girls, railway companions. Lillian Rodin and Minnie Everly weren't saints, but they were human. They were poor, ambitious, and trying to survive in a world that punished women for being visible. The public mourned the scandal, not the women. Even the coroner's report labeled them as unidentified variety girls for weeks before anyone confirmed their names. O'Brien's crime had a face. Theirs barely had a line in the paper. The telegraph companies reported a strange trend after the case. Dozens of freight agents across the Midwest began refusing to handle unclaimed trunks. Some swore they could smell death inside closed boxes. Others said the noise of the trains reminded them of the saw. Urban legend took over. O'Brien's boxes, they called them, haunted trunks that would appear at stations, always marked from Lexington, always empty inside. For decades, Kentucky parents told children not to wander near depots after dark. O'Brien will pack you up if you don't come home. By 1905, the legend had already eclipsed the truth. The story of a sadistic man and two forgotten women became a ghost tale told over bourbon and tobacco smoke. It comforted people, in a way, turning real horror into myth. But the real tragedy wasn't supernatural. It was social. A culture that let men like O'Brien roam unchecked because they wore clean collars. And a justice system that recorded the crime in meticulous detail, but left the victims as footnotes. The Cutting Box murders marked the end of an era, the twilight of America's innocence about evil. It was no longer the crime of the frontier or the duel of the gentleman. It was industrial death, systematic, portable, impersonal, a crime you could ship on a train. And like so many early horrors, it became the foundation for what we now call true crime. The fascination, the fear, the voyeurism all began in places like Lexington, where beauty met brutality and nobody could tell them apart anymore. Time dulls the edges of even the sharpest horror, but every so often a case like this surfaces, reminding us what violence looked like before we had words for it. The Cutting Box murders weren't just about a man killing two women. They were about how easily society accepted it as entertainment, as morality tale, as warning shot to other women who dared to live outside the lines. Claude O'Brien didn't just murder Lillian Rodin and Minnie Everly. He murdered their chance to be remembered as anything but victims. History wrote him in ink. It wrote them in pencil. In the decades that followed, true crime became a commodity. The trunk murders of Lexington were quoted in law lectures, whispered in boarding schools, and dramatized in pulp magazines. People were fascinated, not by the women's lives, but by how neatly their deaths fit into boxes. And maybe that's the lesson buried beneath the sawdust. We still package violence, wrap it in narrative, label it for shipment, sell it as morality or intrigue. We just change the containers. Back then, it was wooden trunks. Now, it's headlines, hashtags, and late-night documentaries. But here's what can't be contained: the fear of women traveling alone in strange cities, the danger of trusting the wrong smile, and the echo of that sound, the whine of a saw cutting through both silence and sympathy. Lexington went on to rebuild its reputation. The red light district was cleaned up, the boarding houses torn down, the city reborn into modernity. But beneath the horse barns and bourbon tours lies a darker track, one that still runs straight north to the station in Cincinnati, where those two trunks arrived. No monument marks their names, no plaque honors their story, just an old freight ledger in the archives that reads, "Two trunks, prepaid," and in that small bureaucratic line, the erasure is complete. They were bought, boxed, and forgotten until now. You've been listening to Deadly Truths with Becca. If you found this story compelling, follow, rate, and share on Spotify, YouTube, and Apple Podcasts. It helps keep these forgotten histories alive. This has been written and narrated by me, can't you tell? And remember, the past isn't dead. It's just doing time in the Bluegrass.